Hello, everyone. Welcome to VGChatz number 3. I'm here with my lovely co host, Paul. Say
Hello.
hi, Paul. Oh, sorry.
Hello.
uh,
Hi.
oh, Jesus. Off to a great start. So, basically, we're. VG Charts is kind of known for being a bit strange from everyone else. We're like, I don't know, would you say, Paul, like 2 months, give or take, behind the usual GOTY awards from sites, like, or some shit like that.
Yeah, so um I prefer to think of it as we give everyone an equal chance. So a
Yes.
lot of websites host their Game of the Year awards, um, in some cases well before the year ends. The the Game Awards, which I still despise the title, but it is apparently the industry standard when it comes to video game awards now. Um, has like a cutoff date that is like a week into December. Um, so you can have big name titles like Halo Infinite last year just miss the cutoff entirely. Um, VG Charts doesn't do that. Our Game of the Year voting doesn't open until after the year ends. And so as a result, we're a bit late with a sort of roundtable discussion here for our Game of the Year awards for 2022. But hopefully the latedness of it compared to some other websites uh, doesn't detract too much, and maybe we get a little more inclusiveness in it to boot.
hmm Well, to also make one correction, so we do have, like, we do technically start voting also in 2022, but that's our preliminary voting, and that's like basically our editor in chief. He holds off on that until like the last game of note of the entire year has been released. So we're there's a little bit of a half in half out kind of ordeal there, but the final, when it comes to the final tally, it ends in 2023, like at the beginning of January. So, but same thing. Like either way, even by that standard, like people are probably wondering what the hell's taking us so long to get to Game of the Year stuff. But I think it's for the better. Like just when you kind of um you converse with some of the other writers and also the users, there is that gap there of like right around Christmas time where people are going back to their backlog of this year and stuff like that. So,
Yeah, I do think one of the very beneficial things, and I don't want this to just turn into a our system's better.
mhm.
Everyone should do it our way thing. But I
Yeah.
do think one of the beneficial things when it comes to designing a later Game of the Year award selection is that it gives people the opportunity to go back and try some of the stuff that um, maybe they hadn't gotten around to so far, which is a lot harder to do with, say, a voting process that happens in, even as early as
November
late
20th.
November. Yeah. Um,
Oh
because
god.
I mean, then you're still just barely past the holiday rush usually, and a lot of
And
people are
there's
still
recency bias to
yeah.
consider as well.
Um, but all right, with all that out of the way, this is um, our own sort of discussion of the uh, Game of the Year awards that were run by VGCharts. If you're not familiar with the process, it's a 50% split between writer vote and user-based vote.
Mhm.
And what we sort of have in mind is just kind of going down most of the genre awards, at least the ones that hopefully we can speak to pretty well. Sharing who won, who was the runner-up, and a few thoughts on how everything played out.
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I'm definitely down to talk about a lot of the genres because in a way, like, I think 2022 is interesting for. So the neat thing is, like when it comes to the genres themselves, you had the two big contenders, right? Like we know who's topping the Game of the Year awards all together, and but underneath that though, I found that there was like a lot of flexibility and variety. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Compared to yeah, like just compared to it seemed like at least with 2021, I kind of feel like this year was it's not like there was more mind-blowing stuff, but at least there was stuff that like carried you through the year and it seems like it's just going to spill over even more into this year.
yeah. So I think 2021 is kind of an interesting year for me because there's no clear-cut set of favorites when it came into award time.
Right.
Um, and I think that maybe speaks to a little bit of genre bias that shows up in these types of awards, but that's a discussion
Hmm.
for another time. Um, but I think you sort of see with 2021 maybe opposed to this year at least, is that there's still at least a lot of great games. You just have to dig for them a bit.
Hmm.
Um, they're not out there as readily. Um,
For sure.
uh, there are some bigger name series that wound up uh, showing up on top of the awards list, like Halo, Metroid. Uh, but then you also have titles like Psychonauts 2, Bravely Default
Right.
2, the uh, I forget the exact title of it, but the Ace Attorney game that was
Oh,
set in
Great Attorney
yeah, Great
Chronicles.
Ace Attorney.
Great Ace.
Um, and then It Takes Two obviously wound up winning a significant portion of awards.
Hmm.
Deathloop is probably not a small title by any stretch of the imagination, but I guess comes from a bigger name studio in Arcane.
Hmm.
Um, Resident Evil 8, can't forget about
Yep.
that.
Yep.
Um, so I think it's sort of a case where you don't have as many titles that are considered clear-cut favorites, but there's still a lot of
Yeah.
quality that's kind of spread out.
That's fair. That's fair. And I mean, in some ways, like when you take away Elden Ring and Ragnarok, like the two big titans, like this 2022 isn't that much different. Like there's a lot of surprises, and hopefully the audience finds as many surprises as we did while going tallying the votes and everything like that.
Yeah, sounds good.
So, without further ado, I have my formal suit on, so might as well hop right into it.
There's gonna be
Alrighty.
a really funny Photoshop right here.
Oh god. I'll look forward to it. All right, so we started off on the site with best shooter of 2022. As we kind of mentioned before, you have preliminary lists of pretty much any decently scored shooter or any decently scored game of any genre is just placed in there. Let's see how many get through. And then you filter out from there to like maybe the top six, the top eight. And then you filter again to the top four. And these are the top four according to staff and community alike. And the short list is of Duty Modern Warfare 2, High on Life, Metal Hellsinger, and Splatoon 3. The runner up was Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. And the winner is Splatoon 3. Boo! Boo!
Probably one of the
Anything?
more predictable results.
Yeah.
Um,
Kind of disappointed in Modern Warfare 2, to be honest, even being runner up, because it's kind of weird because you have these split votes for Call of Duty this year. Because I mean, Warzone 2.0 literally is a entirely different game than Modern Warfare 2. I mean, they have the same mechanics, but like one's you can literally just play Warzone 2 for free, just download it, it's all yours, and you have the microtransactions. Whereas Modern Warfare 2, has more of the suite of campaign, co-op, etc. And opinions are what they are. But at the same time, it's kind of weird how you have an example like Splatoon 3, which I haven't played it, but I've heard is still kind of doing the same kind of rigmarole since the first Splatoon. But at least it's like adapting, improving, incorporating like different ways to think of the gameplay. And it's just not that's kind of like the inverse with Modern Warfare 2, at least to me.
that's an interesting way to look at it. Um, I will admit I'm not very well versed on what Splatoon has done since the original Splatoon.
Hmm.
Um, but I do, at least personally, what has kind of held me back on getting into additional installments in Splatoon
Hmm.
has been like this sort of weird set of rigid requirements, for lack of a better way of putting it, that Nintendo puts into the Splatoon games, and I don't really understand them. Um, like for instance, ever since Splatoon 1, there's been this rule that when you go into multiplayer, um, you're limited to just 2 maps at a time,
Right.
and that goes for like I think it's 30-minute intervals or something like that.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and so if you just want to play, Splatoon for like in half an hour or so, um,
Hmm.
you can just get stuck playing the same 2 maps over and over again, which
Hmm.
I don't understand the decision behind it. I don't understand why you would do that. It's just there, and that sort of like odd decision making process. That's really all they would need. Just remove some of those weirder decisions to get me to check the franchise out again. But that's
Hmm.
just the way it goes.
I'm actually I'm in the same boat as you, actually. Like I stepped off, I had a Wii U. I really loved the first one. I just haven't gotten around to just two or three, don't have a Switch. So, um yeah, but as far as like the similar a few people that I follow that have stuck with it, and share my enthusiasm, like the way they kind of talk about, all the refreshing things for campaign, the little nuances, that keep they just Nintendo does to just keep building out that series. I mean, there's just something about the concept too that's just so funny to me. Like, just you're thinking of a time where it first started, of post-apocalyptic shooters. And here comes this one where it's an arena shooter, but it's all about just painting everything, and uh you know hurting enemies is secondary to your main objective. And I don't know, ever since that first concept, and like, from going from a kid to a squid and stuff like that, is just it's really endearing. And I think on that alone, I think it definitely deserves winner or runner up, just from a distance. That would be my take from it.
Yeah, that's certainly fair. Um, High on Life is a game that I want to get around to at some point.
Mm,
Um, I feel like it's a game that sort of like Forspoken, um, kind of sabotaged itself with its own supposed cleverness.
mm,
Um, but
right.
everything I've heard about it has suggested that the level design and progression are pretty well designed. Um,
Mhm.
and if you can get past the
Oh,
unusual
talking about
aesthetic
talking himself.
and sense of humor, there's something interesting there.
Sure, for
Um,
sure.
all right, moving on. Best platform of 2022. Shortlist for this one was narrowed down to Kirby and the Forgotten Land, Tinykin, and then the Sonic Bros, Sonic Frontiers and Sonic Origins.
Woohoo.
Um, Runner up was Sonic Frontiers, and the winner was
Uh,
Kirby.
woohoo. Pretty much,
Um,
pretty much a shoe in.
uh, so I was expecting this to be a shoo-in. I was surprised by how much support Sonic Frontiers got. Um,
Yeah.
and maybe I just
Mhm.
don't keep up with Sonic games enough. I will admit I very much lost my taste for 3D Sonic uh, back
Mhm.
in like the sixth generation. Um,
So 2 decades on, or you'd say.
it's been a while. Man, Sonic
That
06,
hit you
Sonic
right there,
06 was
didn't
a
it? Right when
time.
I said that, 2 decades, it's like, bam,
It's no use!
Yeah,
right there.
I'm getting old, but if I refuse to acknowledge that I'm getting old, I won't be old.
Yeah, there you go.
That's how that works.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, a lot of people do seem to like Sonic Frontiers. And I'm
Mhm.
curious if that perception will stick around as time goes by, um, or if this will be a Sonic Color situation where it was received well on launch and still has its supporters today, but um, at least isn't as universally liked.
Yeah. I feel like it's gonna be that situation. Speaking more on the short list, I would recommend. I'm definitely glad Tinykin made it, because that one just kind of came out of nowhere. I love that. So basically, you kind of been kind of like not really Toy Story thing, but in essence, you're shrunken down the size. You know, every basically a house is the equivalent of a like a continent to you and your character. It's a 3D space, but you kind of have the Paper Mario aesthetic of your character's like a 2D cutout, along with all the other characters. And the Tinykin kind of operate like Pikmin in the sense that it's like a collectathon, and in order to maybe open up something, you got to find all the Tinykin within an area, or at least like 90-80% or whatever, in order to, let's say, move a light bulb or something like that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
And I just kind of, it wasn't doing it's not like blowing your mind or anything, but it has really solid, just solid fundamentals, solid level design, and just the idea of, the importance of collectathoning, just find all the tiny kin within this area and then you can move on. Just kind of makes you kind of appreciate the level a bit more, just how they spread out everything and how you're able to, spot where you need to go and stuff like that. And I don't know, I just dig that. I did. I'm really glad that was a nice surprise for the short list.
Yeah, I have wanted to try that one out ever since the Pikmin comparison was made. That's still
Right.
a series that is near and dear to me, despite how
hmm
much it frustrated me as a child on the GameCube.
I hard quit at one point with it, even though I'm in the same camp as you, but I just couldn't get through it.
Oh yeah, the controls are, at least for the original, are terrible on the GameCube.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
if you had the patience for it, it would be totally worth it to like go through and you know go back and complete it. At least that's my perspective, at least.
um, Kirby was a despite the joke review I wrote about it earlier in the year,
Right.
was actually a really interesting uh, evolution, I suppose, for
hmm
the typical um, Kirby shenanigans.
For sure.
Uh, it feels like every Kirby game in recent memory just does the same sort of general Kirby platforming, with like one mechanic tacked on to try and make it stand out.
Right.
Um, whether it be Planet Robobots, giant robots that you hop in and smash things with,
hmm
um, or uh, Epic Yarn being it's just a video game that plays itself.
Right.
Um,
Right. Right.
but Forgotten Lands has some genuinely really good boss design, which was
Right.
not something I was expecting from a Kirby game.
hmm
Um, and there's almost like some Devil May Cry Bayonetta, action mechanics in there with uh, perfect dodges and directional attacks and
That's awesome.
um, you know different types of melee weapons that have their own like extensive move sets,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
which sort of exists in previous games with copy abilities, of course, but is
hmm
is much more fleshed out here.
hmm
Um, so that was a fun surprise for me as well.
Yeah, I mean the very moment I saw him controlling an entire car with his mouth, just halfway sucking it or whatever, it's the kind of weird that almost seems exclusive to Japan. So it was like, hell yeah, that's exactly what that's exactly what I would want right now if I
Right.
was into that series. Like if I was, if I had a Switch, yada yada yada, and I was like super into that series. It seemed like a dream come true in some sense. So let's hop to best adventure. Adventure had just a huge breadth of various games that kind of fall into that. There's no well, I mean, there's one obvious popular choice, but beyond that, there's just an insane plurality across, the triple A to modest indie games. And here is our top four on the short list. So we have Return to Monkey Island, AI, The Somnium Files, dash Nirvana Initiative. I fucking hate how that's spelled. It's so annoying. Pentiment and Stray. And our runner up was Return to Monkey Island, with the winner being Stray. You saw it coming a mile away, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, game has a cat in it. You can't exactly
Eh,
compete against that.
yeah, pretty much. Like there's just there's no fighting that, especially when we have since we have community votes, like just any cat owner, like it's almost like near universal. Any cat owner is at least gonna like it, so it's either like in their top three or something like that. So yeah, I mean we played it. we played it in VGChatz number 2, and talked about it and digging it. I guess Paul, did you get around to completing it? I
I'm still
wasn't sure.
working through it.
Okay, okay.
I made progress, but
Oh, did you get to the more body horror section, the gnarly one?
I don't think I've
Oh, okay, okay. No,
gotten there yet.
yeah. If you know, and that's where. Okay, so
Oh, I'm
yeah,
already dealing with body horror with Dead Space this month.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I get that. So yeah. So as we've already brought up, I reviewed it, completely reviewed it, and yeah, like basically, there's there's going to be a new market between this and I think the only other one I can think of is Untitled Goose Game. As far as it's not like either of those games have incorporated an animal like that's the first time an animal has ever been incorporated into a game. It's just taking it seriously is kind of where it's branching off to now, where you not only think of the animal as just something of a meme to kind of goof around with, or like one little concept. It's more of, what if this animal was the protagonist that, you know, in a sense, talk to other people in the game. So you get your side quest, and it's just like a full game. And I think that's why Stray is still being talked about, will be continually talked about, at least until Stray 2. Then maybe more expansive mechanics and stuff like that. I wasn't obviously even though I wasn't the biggest fan, and it wasn't my top choice, but still, it's so easy to respect it regardless of you know where you place it.
Yeah, and even if I'm not sure the game is 100% for me, it's still a title that I can certainly respect the energy and design behind. Um, Another game on the list that I wanted to give a shout out to, and
Hmm.
got my vote personally, was Pentiment,
Hmm.
which
Yeah.
comes from Obsidian, which I still maintain is the best storytellers, I suppose, out there.
Mm.
Um, and I I hesitate to describe it
Yeah.
because I think it's sort of like an Undertale type experience where legitimately knowing nothing about it at all will improve your experience with it going into things.
That's
Um,
a good way to put it. And there is kind of like, in a way, it is relying on a different layer of like subversion. You might have like, man, what was, I mean, I can think of some movies that kind of do the subversion thing very well. You brought up Undertale. I'm trying to think of, there was one more example. Do you know what I mean? Where it kind of played around with the genre in creative ways.
yeah. So I guess when you say subversion, and this won't be like a particularly, I think, accurate comparison for me,
Hmm.
because it's just such a radically different genre.
Hmm.
But at least when I subversion of a genre comes up to me, I immediately think of Spec Ops: The Line. Um,
Yeah, but that's like in tone. That is kind of connected to what we're talking
yeah,
about.
it's definitely not the same thing, but that's sort of like the immediate example that just jumps off the back of my mind.
Yeah, and that's really good connective. There's connective tissue there, because it basically, if we'll just tell you, him and I can really tell you is, was it it's in the is it 1600s for the setting, or was it earlier? I think it was earlier than that.
It's early 1500s, I think.
Early fifth. Okay.
1518, I think, is when the game starts.
Yeah. Okay. So just think of that setting. Think of the timeline. In historical terms, and murder mystery. But if you just go in with that, and then along the way, it becomes something more, and it's kind of in a similar way to. spec outs the line like modern military shooter, third person, if that's all we brought up to you, it becomes way more than that. In as the further you get into it, it's like an actual exploration of different dynamics and we'll just keep. I'll try to be as tight-lipped as him, but yeah, like that was definitely deserving the short list. Like even some fans like or would also bring it up as deserving runner up or even winner. Obviously some people were huge fans of it as well. Um, and I guess another interesting one I wanted to look up that could have made the short list if it was more popular was the excavation of Bob's Harrow. I
I
guess
have not played that one.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a point and click adventure only on PC. But in a way, that's also kind of like there's a concept there, but then I don't know if it really. I need obviously I want to. It's on my wish list and stuff like that. But it kind of gives me that same vibe of here's the premise. The more you explore it, there's different dynamics going on underneath it. So yeah.
Cool. Well, with that, we will move on to best action game of
Yes.
2022. Um, which had a short list of two big heavy hitters and then two smaller titles. So shortlist was Bayonetta 3, God of War Ragnarok, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Shredder's Revenge, and Vampire Survivors, the indie darling of the year. Um, the runner-up, which was honestly pretty surprising to me, was Ragnarok, and Bayonetta 3 was the winner.
Woohoo.
Um, and Bayonetta
Hey, you
3
reviewed them both
is
too, so I like the floor for. I just want the floor is all yours. I'm sorry to interrupt about that, but I just want to,
no, go ahead.
you're intimate. Like I mean, you're intimately knowledgeable of both of them, so it's like kind of an interesting thing.
Yeah. So before I get into to either one of them, I guess I do want to give a quick shout out to Vampire Survivors. Well
Absolutely.
worth your time. Give it a shot.
Hmm.
Very unique take on the action genre. If you haven't tried it yet, um, Bayonetta 3 is a game that I still have very mixed feelings about.
Hmm.
I think if you can just separate and this is maybe an interesting discussion in your own right, like how much do sort of the more ancillary aspects of um, a game that should be very core gameplay focused affect your experience with it.
Mm.
Um, if you can just separate the core combat of Bayonetta 3 out from the rest of the experience,
Hmm.
it is a fantastic action game.
Right,
Um,
right. Probably the like the ultimate one as far as like mechanical complexity, or would that still go to Devil May Cry 5, in your opinion?
uh, if we're going by pure complexity, I
Hmm.
would put Devil May Cry 4 still at the top of the genre.
Oh.
Um, because DMC5 does remove some higher level tech,
Hmm.
in which is a little frustrating, but yeah, there's some things like inertia and guard flying that aren't present in 5 for whatever reason.
Mm.
Um,
Gotcha.
Not that I think that makes it a significantly worse game.
Sure,
Um,
sure.
but for Bayonetta 3 at least, very good game, very technical, but just has a very and Platinum has always done this, but
Yeah.
even more than usual.
Mhm.
Um, this sort of obsession with just bringing the action to a screeching halt
Mhm.
in favor of some set piece.
Yeah,
Um,
distractions and stuff
yeah.
like that. I'm with you there.
Um, Like, so one of the big inclusions in 3 is these infernal summons, which are pretty much just used exclusively in cutscenes and QuickTime events in 1 and 2, um, are now part of the gameplay. Um, and every time you unlock a new one, you have to basically solve this puzzle with it, where you just have to like stand in place and guide it around an area,
Mm.
um, which is as entertaining as it sounds. Um, and then usually when you get to the boss fight at the end of the mission where you collect it, um,
Right.
you have to use it in this very protracted, drawn out sequence, which basically amounts to a QuickTime event in just a really long QuickTime event in its own right.
Mhm.
Um, that oftentimes takes upwards of like 4 to 5 minutes to complete,
Huh.
uh, and is just it's boring. It's really bad. It robs the
Mhm.
game of all its pacing, um,
Right.
and just pours sand on the ashes.
Right.
Um, and then you come to what's really interesting for me, which is the ending.
Mm.
Um, and Bayonet is not a game that you really think of for the story. Um, so I almost hesitate to like criticize um, the ending of a non particularly story heavy game,
Mhm.
but I don't think there's been an ending to a long running. I'm not even sure if I can call it an ending because I'm sure they're going to revisit it at some point.
Sure.
But at least it seems like it's supposed to be the finale for a long running series,
Right.
um,
Yeah.
that has disappointed me that much since Mass Effect 3.
Oh, Jesus
Um,
Christ.
and
Just
I don't want to.
invoking Mass Effect 3, I need a little bit of I need a few seconds just to recalibrate myself and, I almost fainted there.
Yeah.
But go go on.
um, I don't want to spoil too much, but it was just like it surprised me how much I was just bothered by it. Because it
Right.
frankly just feels like an insult to everyone who's cared about that series at all.
Mhm.
Um,
Right.
over the past, what is it now, 13 years I think since the original. I think it was 2009. Um, so I if you can take all of the really good stuff out of Bayonetta 3, you have a fantastic action game. Probably one of the best that's ever been made.
Right, right.
Unfortunately, Hideki Kamiya just continues to be an absolute gremlin and insist on putting all of this bizarre design choices,
Mhm.
both from a gameplay and a story standpoint in there.
Right,
Um,
right.
It so I don't want to spoil too much of the ending, but since we brought up Devil May Cry 5 earlier, it
Mm.
feels like they kind of got like halfway into production and saw DMC5 have like a succession story, um, where by the end of it, Nero has kind of taken over Dante's role as like the go-to demon hunter on Earth.
Sure.
Um, Hopefully, spoiling a 3-year-old game isn't too faux pas at this point. Um, and they wanted to do something similar, but they had already written a plot that was about something entirely different. So
Oh, yeah.
they had to like cram this, you know, couple of very last minute plot twists in, and
Oh,
they just did not get the time or development they needed.
the less disappointing end, I heard Ragnarok's story was something you were a big fan of.
Yeah, um, I'll talk about that now actually because I probably would just jump over the narrative category.
Sure.
I do like Ragnarok's story a lot. I
Hmm.
think Santa Monica has a really good talent for telling stories. It addressed pretty much all of my problems with the first one,
Hmm.
um, which was that you would have sort of these points where characters would, particularly Atreus, went through
Yeah.
a very weirdly resolved arc.
The
He finds out,
artificiality of it.
yeah.
Hmm.
Um, the character development feels a lot more genuine
Hmm.
this time around, and I wasn't last time around. I didn't completely buy that Kratos, at least, and maybe this is just the nearness to God of War 3 for me.
Sure.
Um, but I didn't totally buy that Kratos in God of War 2018 was the same guy as the Kratos who uh, blotted out the sun, flooded all of civilization,
Yeah.
um, and murdered the entirety of the Greek pantheon on his way to revenge.
Yeah.
Um, I think Ragnarok does at least in my opinion, and maybe this is just a distance thing again. Um, Kratos feels a lot more believable to me.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
the mechanics of Ragnarok, I think, are also significantly improved from first time around. There's
Hmm.
a lot more enemy variety, which is
Oh
good.
my God. That's definitely one of the. I mean, I don't know. Should we? Because you're bringing up stuff that I kind of want to chime into, like when it comes to what you're hitting on with 2018 and stuff like that, as far as yeah, but I don't know if I
Yeah,
just kind
go
of hate
ahead.
interrupting
If
too.
you if
Well,
you got something that you want to say, go for it.
it is kind of like a weird. There is a weird dynamic though about this. There's a weird situation about this whole thing, right? Because people, I mean, a lot of fans. There's a lot of new fans with God of War ever since 2018, and they will go back to you know, co- they'll compare and contrast Greek God of War, and it's really weird because when you think of when David Jaffe was still there, when this thing was still going, or when it was just starting, you know, it's more of a it, it's more of like 90s schlock, which is fine. It does have a really solid story. Like the fundamentals are interesting, but it's framed as like there's kind of like a fuck you attitude to everything. You know what I mean? Like the design, almost like all the writers and designers and stuff like that were binging Mountain Dew and stuff like that, but while
Oh,
also reading like Greek mythos. Do you know what I mean? And like trying to incorporate that while also looking at Devil May Cry and like what I mean, like just forming something that was had this weird energy to it that was you didn't really have he wasn't a likable protagonist and he wasn't really sympathetic, but even he kind of knew that. So it kind of worked in a way. Do you know what I mean?
yeah. So I absolutely know what you're talking about. I remember they had an interview with one of the devs in 2005, I think, when
Hmm.
he said, and I'm pretty sure this is a word for word quote.
Hmm.
You should play God of War because it'll get you laid.
You should play God of War because it'll get you laid.
Um,
Yeah.
uh, which I don't think is necessarily true. But setting aside the veracity of that, the idea of create so Kratos's arc in the first three games is an interesting one for me.
Hmm.
Um, because I think a lot of the time you see characters that start out as being unlikable and then slowly get redeemed.
Yeah.
Um, or maybe not necessarily totally unlikable, but you have like your um uh Joel and Ellie arc in like The Last of Us, where
Sure. They have their
you
hard
have
edges,
yeah.
basically.
Kratos is kind of like the opposite. In God of War 1 and by one I mean the original PlayStation 2
Yeah.
God of War. He's I wouldn't call him likable, but he at least doesn't seem like a bigger jerk than the guy he's trying to kill. Like Ares is
Yes.
still you can still very much, even if Kratos is not doing some great things, you can still very much sympathize with him
Hmm.
on his quest to kill Ares.
Hmm.
Um, by the time God of War 3 rolls around, I kind of felt like I should stop playing the game because I was just terrorizing humanity at that point,
Hmm.
or whatever of humanity was left after I literally flooded
Yeah.
all of Greek civilization.
Right.
Um, so it's very interesting to me the sort of character arc that he goes through.
Yeah, and in to me, like people will like bring up how much they hate the old Kratos, which whatever, fair enough. But I mean, to me, when I when you're going through the first three games, and I guess Ascension and the spin-offs too, but let's stick into the main trilogy. You're you kind of to me, I've always understood it as the the energy that people like Jaffe and stuff like that, like, hey, this game will get you laid and stuff like that, and the kind of like machismo behind it, that kind of communicates a similar kind of ethic and morality that like Greeks had back then. Like, they like a lot of Greek stories had every god was vain, cruel. You know what I mean? Like they made like all their gods just super flawed humans that were just kind of like the superheroes from the boys or something like that. So it works. And then like you mentioned with now how does that work with Norse mythology? We're kind of like grabbing the aesthetics of Norse with God of War 2018 and Ragnarok. But then they're kind of more like big bulky Marvel scripts in a sense or something like that.
Hmm.
I mean that's maybe like I don't know, maybe I got a few screws loose and that's just, how I kind of interpret it or whatever, but that's just kind of why everything feels more like hermetically sealed. Even if I'm not even the biggest fan of the old God of Wars in the sense like they have some flaws, but I think God of War 2 is probably the best one. And I don't know, just something about that will always be more comfortable for me compared to Norse God of War,
That's fair.
along with
Um,
other mechanics. I think you and I like this is sorry to interrupt again, um, but this is so behind the scenes. We did want to bring on Chin Tran, who was another one of our writers, but he wasn't able to make it, and he was actually I think he would have been like an interesting opposite to us as far as like being he's a much bigger it seems like he's a huge fan of 2018 and Ragnarok and picking his brain about that, but I guess there's always going to be there's going to be kind of like a disconnect between like you and me and like some of the other users and stuff like that.
yeah, for sure, and I think that certainly shows up with how popular um, Ragnarok is.
Hmm.
Um,
And how
the
infamous your review is.
uh, I thought it was reasonably um, polite, all things considered. Um,
I personally think so too, but that's where like I don't know. There's sometimes like a required opinion for some games, and I guess you know
no one,
like
no one has sent me any threats to kill my mom for that one, so
oh
I'll take that one as a win.
there you go. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
speaking of games where in a series where someone to threaten to kill my mom over, let's move on to best RPG.
All right,
Um,
woohoo!
see that excellent segue, kids? That's why they
Yes,
pay me the
yes.
big bucks.
Hell yeah.
So the RPG list for 2022 was Pokemon Legends Arceus, and I am told
Is
that
that?
Arceus is the correct pronunciation because,
Oh,
and I'm not kidding about this, it was changed because it sounded too much like arse, yes, and that was becoming a joke in Europe. I don't know if how true that necessarily is, but it's very funny to me if it is. Other three games, Chained Echoes, Elden Ring, and Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Xenoblade was the runner-up, and the winner, to the surprise of no one at all, was Elden Ring, on its way to win basically ours and every other website's RPG of the year award.
mm-hmm.
Um,
Praise the sun. Oh wait,
so
that's a little old. Never mind.
yeah,
Can you edit
I'll
that when we get to?
I'll get into Elden Ring more when it comes time for the overall Game of the
Sure,
Year
sure.
award.
Yeah.
Xenoblade 3 is a I think a game that kind of represents a nice sort of midpoint for me, between Xenoblade 1, which I really liked.
Mm-hmm.
It's still one of my favorite traditional JRPGs ever.
Mm-hmm.
I think it has one of the best stories that you'll find in a video game still. And then Xenoblade 2, which I don't like so much.
Dude, I've seen so many fucking memes from it. Like, it's insane. Some absolutely atrocious dialogue. Um, I I mean, I didn't. Okay, so I haven't played them. I am looking forward to. I do want to really get Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition. So I am looking forward to that. But man, the some of the I caught like a live stream or two of Xenoblade 2, and I was like, what the hell is this? It seems like a huge step back.
You definitely have to have a very high tolerance for, I guess, what I'll call more anime tropes,
Mm-hmm.
to enjoy two's plot.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Three's narrative, I think, is a bit in between for that one.
Sure.
It isn't quite as heavy on uh,
Weeb shit. Can we just say it?
yeah,
Can we just
that's
say
probably the
it?
best. But you'll still have instances of, like, where like the villain will, scream for like 30 seconds about how could I possibly have been defeated?
I mean,
Uh,
yeah, like taken in like little in morsels or like taken in moderation. I think it can be like cheesy fun. You know,
I don't know. I can't think of a point where I've ever liked that, especially if it's going for like a more serious game. Um, which like
yeah,
Xenoblade 3 is for
maybe.
the most part trying to do.
Okay, okay, sure.
Uh, it does try to tell a pretty weighty narrative, about mortality,
Hmm.
and sort of the inevitability of death.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I do
Mhm.
think that gets let down from time to time by just how cartoon characters, uh, the set of main villains, is for the game. Um,
Sure.
so the cast of characters that wind up harassing you for, most of uh, Xenoblade 3, they are all
Man.
they're called Mobius,
Yeah, yeah.
and they almost always have some connection to the main cast.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most of the time it's intended to come off as a particularly emotional or dramatic moment.
Sure, sure.
And it just it did not work for me most of the time.
Gotcha, gotcha.
I'm going to try and be as spoiler free about this as possible,
Mm-hmm.
but I'll still, here's a big spoiler warning if someone hasn't played it and doesn't want any sort of mild spoilers about it at all.
Mm-hmm.
One of the characters is a childhood acquaintance of some of the party members,
Yeah.
and it's when his identity is revealed, it's intended to be a very dramatic emotional reunion of sorts that
Right,
is
right.
heavily weighed down with a lot of guilt,
Mm-hmm.
revolving around how they got there. Uh, but it feels so ham-fisted, and the dialogue feels so drawn out that it's just hard for me to take it seriously. Um, and that's just sort of a problem that's prevalent to the entire game. The flip side of that is that I do think the mechanics of Xenoblade 3 are the best they've been in the series so far.
Cool.
From a gameplay standpoint, it it throws a lot at you. It's still
Mm-hmm.
tutorializing stuff like 40 hours in.
Mm-hmm.
And for the most part, it's pretty enjoyable.
Sure.
There's a lot of variety on display, especially with the different uh, sort of classes that you can change into,
Right,
um,
right, right.
and it does it does feel a bit overpowered. Um, Chain attacks feel like they get out of hand very quickly,
Mm-hmm.
um, but still very much an enjoyable ride from a gameplay standpoint throughout. So for me, it sort of splits that gap between 1 and 2 in terms of enjoyability.
Gotcha. Well, and with that, I think we can safely transition over to, let's go with best puzzle. So best puzzle was, just give some background. Best puzzle and best RPG, by the way. When it came to our, we have our preliminary and then our final voting to get to our short list. When it comes to puzzle and RPG, those are the only two categories where there were eight and the that got past preliminary. Which, I mean, and for RPG, those were, the majority were Japanese RPGs, with the exception of Chained Echoes. And when it comes to best puzzle, I mean, the variety was mostly kind of like middle market or indie titles and stuff like that. And then when we finally got to the short lists, we got to number one was Teardown. Number two, Lego Bricktales, Dofromantic, and Patrick's Parabox. The runner-up was Dorfromantic, and the winner was Lego Bricktales. And it's kind of weird. Like it's even kind of weird for me to be listing out because I'll admit I played every single puzzle game that made it to the short list with the exception of the winner. I don't understand how it happened that way, but I guess everyone was a big fan of Lego.
I think it's I don't want to necessarily speculate too much on a genre I'm not too heavily involved with,
Hmm.
but I think that's probably one of those instances where Lego is just such a big name brand.
Hmm.
It,
Well,
that just brings in more attention. So you have
for
more
sure.
people that played it.
But could I also I forgot to mention. So I obviously I didn't play it, but I did kind of like, I checked out some other reviews. Plus, I also talked with somebody who voted for it on our on the staff, and the gist that I got from it is it's one of the few like Lego game, when you see Lego DC, Lego Marvel, yada yada yada, like everything, all the building is kind of done for you. So to have a puzzle game, like, make you go from A to B, you have to build things, and it has a full-on physics engine to like see like, hey, does your bridge hold up? You know what I mean? Does your set of stairs like actually maintain like staying upright even when there's weight put on them? So there's actually, like, it's one of the few Lego games that actually goes back to the core of what Lego's all about. Just build your own thing, and here's a bunch of pieces. Now make your own, like Picasso, or you know what I mean?
Hmm.
And I think it able to being able to do that is what captured so much attention from so many people. And for the, runner up, like, as weird as the title is, Dorfromantic, that has to be one of the most, like, calm, kind of like, basically, city, not really a city builder, because it's more of, you get like 90 tiles, hexagonal tiles. They'll either have forests, rock, town, like a few buildings, maybe some waterways, and all you do is just keep connecting each one to the other. You know what I mean? And then eventually you're just making an entire countryside in like an hour or two.
Mm.
And it's just like, I mean, if you played it, you know what I mean. Like, I'd even, if it's on if it's on sale, like if you're just in the mood for something that's super calm and easygoing, I'd heartily recommend that.
To put it on the ever expanding backlog list.
Exactly. And Teardown too. I mean, that one's like, have you heard much about that one? Because that was like in early access for a while
I have
until,
not.
so basically, you know, uh, you get a scenario like time to pull off a heist and get from A to B, but the entire, how you do an objective, like everything in the world is destructible. So like you can, imagine if there's, get to a safe in a specific building, and then you figure out like, well, there's an excavator or a big crane like maybe a block away. How about I just drive that in, break through the emergency exit, and that'll be my way to get in and do X or Y. And there's something so fascinating about just how much detail went into its physics engine, that just on that alone is at least intriguing for, hopefully, for any puzzle fan. I definitely recommend that one as well.
So I'll touch on action adventure briefly next. Shortlist for that was Horizon Forbidden West, Tunic, Plague Tale Requiem, and Lego Star Wars Skywalker Saga. This is one of the rare categories where I actually did play all of the games here. Tunic was the runner-up, and Horizon was the winner. Um, Horizon is another sort of game that at 9 or so months later, I guess 10 months later now, um, I have some mixed feelings about too. There's a lot of changes that happen within the combat design. Far more options available to the players, specifically in terms of how you approach different scenarios with different elemental affinities for your bow,
Right.
to the point where I almost wonder if it's a little excessive at points.
Hmm.
Um, I think from a story standpoint, I find myself liking Aloy as a character a lot more in Forbidden West than I did in Zero Dawn. Which isn't to say that
I mean, she was
necessarily.
boring in Zero Dawn. I'm sorry, I gotta say it. Like, I just,
There's so
uh,
there's it's there were just these very like odd dialogue options in Zero Dawn that I think were like meant to give her like more of a personality and just
mission failed.
yeah,
100%.
make her just feel very unenjoyable to spend time with. Like there's this one guy, there's this one instance that sticks out with me,
Hmm.
where this guy asks or is uh talking with you, and the dialogue prompt that comes up and you can pick is uh my eyes are up here, to which he responds with I was looking at your spear. um and she's like basically
God.
why, and he's like well you use it to possess machines and make them work for you, and that's pretty unique. I'd like to know how it works. And she's like oh would you like me to explain it to you, and he's like yeah, and she's like you wouldn't get it.
Oh my
And
God.
it's like what.
Man, I'm even like, I'm just trying to remember that bit. That's like, oh God.
I don't know, it's just very aggressively hostile. But they do a lot, I think, to flesh her out more as like I think her own independent character in this game. You can
Okay.
see
Okay. Sure.
one of the things I like is you can sort of see her sort of struggling to deal with the position of being like this expected savior of everything,
Right. Right.
and because she's in that role, she doesn't get sort of what the everyday person is used to. Like
Sure.
there's
Sure.
a really interesting scene early on where I don't want to give any more spoilers than I have to away. But she sees one of her friends uh, kissing their love interest,
Hmm.
basically. And there's sort of like a moment of sad realization that she probably isn't going to get that, um, because of the lifestyle that she has,
Hmm.
um, which I think is interesting.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. Kind
Uh,
of like, big hero has to make the big sacrifices, kind of situation.
yeah. Um, Tunic was a very interesting sort of throwback to some older 2D Zelda uh,
Right.
archetypes.
Hmm.
Um, some very clever and interesting boss design there.
Yeah.
Um, I'm gonna level with you about Star Wars. I did not like that. um,
Hmm.
it's
Damn it.
been
Shots fired.
a, a popular pick, I think, but it and maybe this is just the result of me getting too old to enjoy the traditional Lego format.
Hmm.
Um, it just it just does not feel particularly fun.
Mm.
Is the best way that I can describe things. Um,
No.
the combat is kicked up a notch, and
Hmm.
there are some interesting things you can do, um, with uh, attack canceling with a lightsaber, as bizarre as that sounds.
Yeah.
Um, but I think what sort of got to me is that there's just fewer, as best I can describe them, like set pieces.
Hmm.
Um, which I think I sort of realized is kind of the core of the Lego experience for me. At least when it comes to video games. Like you're obviously not going to have super in-depth combat. Um,
Right.
you're not going to have, incredibly deep world design. Like the most fun part of Lego Star Wars, at least for me personally, is just, putting these characters in these really crazy hectic situations,
Hmm.
and then, having them either fight some kind of a boss with like 1,000,000 hearts, or have to like in the case of the original Lego Star Wars, back, I think that was 6th Gen 2, fight like the Emperor,
Right, right,
with
right.
Darth Vader and Luke teaming up, which is obviously something that doesn't happen in the original Star Wars, but it's fun and wacky, and it's because it's just such a bizarre sort of situation that it winds up being fun, at least in my opinion.
Mhm.
And this game focuses much more heavily on like just sort of combat,
Gotcha.
when it comes to its bigger encounters, and I don't think that works as well in its favor.
Sure, sure.
Alrighty, before we move on to best overall game of the year, I was gonna throw a couple shout-outs to some games that did not win any
Oh,
awards.
our snubs,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, or in most cases didn't even make a short list.
Yeah.
But which I still wanted to acknowledge anyway.
Mhm.
Um, so for me, there's a bunch of indie games that came out this year
Mhm.
that were really solid, and largely by virtue of having to compete with Cat Game, uh,
Yeah.
more or less went under the radar. Um,
Mhm.
so Solstice, very good Devil May Cry-ish hack and slash game. Um, uh, has a surprisingly engrossing story to boot. I won't argue it's
Mhm.
incredible narrative quality or anything, but
Sure.
the characters are pretty engaging by the end, and the combat mechanics are very surprisingly deep,
Yeah.
for a studio taking their first shot, um, at a genre that, at least in my experience, is pretty difficult to develop for on your first time through. Um,
Mhm.
so was very pleasantly surprised there, and shout outs to Reply Game Studios for that.
Mhm.
Um, Another one that I think was actually on a short list, but didn't win anything, and I think won some awards on other sites, was Neon White from Angel Matrix.
Yeah.
Um, a very good first person platform action thing. It's hard to
It's a huge
describe it.
hybrid of many things, yeah.
Uh,
Cart,
yeah,
card
there's
game.
a card element to it,
Mhm.
which initially I was terrified of, because I am not a big card game person. Um,
Mhm.
but it really doesn't even need. I'm not even sure why they have cards, other than to maybe make it a easier visual representation. Basically, the way it works is that you can fire your gun normally, which has a limited amount of ammo, or you can expend all of that ammo for one particular special effect with the gun, uh,
Mhm.
which discards the card instantly.
Yep.
Uh, uh,
It's a great concept.
yeah,
Immediately, if they as long as they hit it right, it's an absolute banger of a game.
yep,
That's what I love about that premise.
yeah, and would probably realistically be my favorite game this year if it had just not had the worst story of any game ever. But oh well. Um,
Oh, well.
Ixion, was another indie game that surprised me quite a bit. Kind of a simulation strategy mixture, um, set in a space setting. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Frostpunk at all,
I
but
am. Yeah, yeah.
has some similarities to that. Um, got a lot of pushback for how difficult it was.
Mhm.
Maybe I'm just a masochist. I thought that was pretty well finely tuned for the most part. Um, Towards the end, I think it kind of becomes a little tedious. because the end just requires a ridiculous amount of resources past when there's any threat to you. So you just have to kind of sit there grinding out resources for like an hour or so.
Sure.
But other than that, very solid strategy experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then two more I just want to hit on real quickly before turning the floor over to you, because I don't want to take up all the time here. The game I was not expecting anything from, Final Fantasy Stranger Paradise.
Kill
Is I think
chaos.
yeah, I came into that expecting nothing more than a bunch of chaos memes. What I got was the first game I think I've ever seen to actively combine the sort of more action, Devil May Cry, Bayonetta, Metal Gear Rising genre with a Dark Souls feel.
Sure.
And there's been a bunch of games that have tried it. This is the first one I've seen that's pulled the gameplay off well. Story is incredibly stupid, but
Right.
if you can, sort of take it as a fun, cheesy little romp, with some surprisingly deep class building and strategy elements at points that are required to defeat some of the tougher bosses. It's a lot of fun. I just wish that Team Ninja could get rid of that awful gear system that's persisted since Neo through now.
Sure.
And then last one for me, I have to give a shout out to it, is Chop Goblins. I know
Praise the chop.
it's become a meme, but it's honestly, it would have been my pick for shooter. It's what I voted for.
Sure.
But no one else.
I love the gameplay for it. Like I was watching when I watched your live stream of it, and I actually just recently picked it up. I love when you kill some of them and you just hear that little "avenge me."
Yeah,
That's
the voice lines are fantastic. I
so
still will
good.
not get over just some dude rocking up, just shouting, "Where's all the cheese?" and then chucking a knife into my face.
It's so goofy. It's like, and I actually I also I don't know if you engage much on Twitter, but I think the developer is David Simansky.
Yes, the
Okay.
dude that made Dusk and Iron Lung.
Yeah. And like even on Twitter, like he's like if you want to follow a developer who seems like a pretty down to earth guy, but also has like a really interesting perspective on media altogether, I would, maybe hopefully Paul will just maybe submit a link or something like that. Like so far, seems like a just a chill dude with some interesting perspective.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, and I guess it'd be my turn then. So uh, let's see. When it comes to snubs, I mean, we've talked to like, I mean, we haven't brought up VR games, but Moss Book Two was definitely my favorite, and that was also the winner. Let's see. So there's one interesting case here where, so the next game I'm thinking of is Citizen Sleeper. I reviewed that on another site, whereas Paul reviewed it on VGCharts, and it was kind of like when it came to praises and criticisms, they were kind of eerily similar. Only I'm a bit more like I'm a bit um I'm a bigger fan of it. Like I think it was a genuinely great surprise. Um like it really sucks that it was snubbed from like all special categories as well. Like I think best original music. I think me
Yeah,
me and Paul would have loved to see that on the short list at least.
it definitely had my favorite soundtrack of the year.
So, dude, it's like if you go watch if you go watch the trailer, the launch trailer for it, or if you just look up Prismatic Lens, which is the basically the title cover for it. Paul hopefully will maybe put another link. I'm gonna make Paul do all the work here. Um, so just when you listen to it, it perfect. I have not listened to any other soundtrack that perfectly encapsulates the mood as much as Citizen Sleeper for all like 2022 games. Instantly you're in it. You're so basically the idea of it is it's a tabletop RPG. So, you're basically a kind of like a cyborg that's kind of running low on power, so to speak, or running low on time. You've escaped your corporate overlords. You're on this space station. You're trying to eke out some existence, and then eventually thrive. And instead of any kind of gameplay, sorry, the main gameplay mechanic is just dice rolling. You wake up every day, you get a new set of dice. You roll to see whatever action you're taking, whether it's working for some cash, or doing something for a relationship goal, or opening up a new area which can help you later on, stuff like that. It's all just dice rolling, going to sleep, um managing meters and stuff like that. But it's so interesting, like, just the even though towards the end, um like I said, we both it's kind of insane, we both share like the criticisms of it being so it gets easier towards the end as you're building up and stuff like that. But I love how worth it felt, like, in a way, because you become like this, like, you're almost like a techno master of this space station, for ways I won't spoil here. The the way things build up is just, to me, it was so meticulously paced that I really love when it just kind of becomes easy mode at the end, but it felt worth it. There's like an emotional connection in your character who never speaks. Uh, there's really I don't think there's any voice acting besides maybe, like, I think they say a word or two before the text to speech comes up or whatever. I can't quite remember that part, but it's one of my favorite games of the year. Excellent job, like a huge surprise hit, and just so many great elements to it. And my last one would be, I think, the first game I played in 2022, or the first I reviewed, like the first new game, was called Summertime Madness, and it's a puzzle game, first person perspective. Just kind of walk around environment, manipulate stuff, and like, kind of like hidden Rube Goldberg machines kind of sprout out, and you're kind of figuring out your place here. And the premise is all about a painter, I think during World War II, like, basically his entire outside world is being shelled to smithereens, and all of that chaos and trauma makes him just go into the painting he's working on. He literally, like, just kind of goes into it as a means of escaping. And like, there's just something about that, both the premise and then how that's communicated through some of the level design, I thought was really just just solid stuff. Like, it's not as good as in the second half, but there's one area in particular that I think it probably constitutes the best, like, puzzle sequence of last year. It was kind of a shame it didn't make the short list, but you know, that's just the way it goes sometimes.
So the shortlist for overall was Bayonetta 3, Elden Ring, God of War Ragnarok, Splatoon 3, and Xenoblade 3. A
Mhm.
lot of threes on there. Runner-up was Xenoblade 3, and the winner was Elden Ring, which is now, after, I think this is 15 straight years it was, where my Game of the Year award did not line up once with the websites. We've had back-to-back years where my favorite game has been the game the website picked.
Mhm.
So I'm taking this as internal validation. Um, Elden Ring, I think, is still not quite my favorite From Software game,
Right.
but it is probably a very strong second if it isn't first. Um,
Sure.
There's a lot that it does very well. I think the open world format works very well with it, and I think it does a lot to alleviate some of the biggest concerns that people have with the game's difficulty. Because if something is too hard for you, you can very much just go somewhere and do something else. And
Right.
like that's sort of always been kind of an option in previous titles. But eventually, you do kind of have
You
to just
gotta go through it. Yeah, you have
right.
to. You have
Um,
that one path to push
Elden
through.
Ring has not only different places you can go to progress, because the requirement to beat the game is literally just defeating. I think it's 4 or 5 out of a possible 7 bosses. But you can discover so many additional things along the way that just make it easier to deal with.
Mhm.
Particularly the new summoning system, which is a bit like the player summoning from previous games, but much more extensive now in what it lets you do.
For sure.
Um, the general combat design, I think, is also pretty engaging.
Mhm.
Um, I I think I still like Dark Souls 3's bosses as a whole better. There are some
Right.
really great ones at Elden Ring, but I will not forgive Elden Ring for Godskin Duo anytime soon.
Mhm.
Um,
Plus some healthy amount of repeats.
there are. I will say that
Maybe
doesn't.
not like not super. It's not like egregious, but it's there, and it's like
Yeah,
maybe could that's this is another interesting question, I guess, for Elden Ring and just for coming games in general that'll be like it is when do the excesses become more of a issue than actually something to like a benefit or something like that.
right.
And you know, I think because what Elden Ring does feels so refreshing, kind of like what Breath of the Wild did. I think it's easier to overlook that compared to I think Sekiro had I remember repeat wasn't don't they do the monkeys? They did like the
Yes,
monkey
the
yeah.
Guardian Ape show up 3 times, I
Yeah,
think.
the Guardian Ape, yeah. And yeah, like but yeah, that's all. I can't add much to it, but that's just my takeaway is it's an interesting it sets up an interesting new scenario and I wonder like if you have developers who are decrying your your actually rather intuitive and immersive UI, it does make me wonder what's in it for the future of AAA games if they're going to be like every I mean they can't be blind to this. They know what it's been awarded, the Game of the Year awards, all that stuff, like all the gold medals it's gotten. Like I I hope in a way this is like a symbol for or a Rosetta Stone basically for coming open world AAA games. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so that that brings up a kind of an interesting talking point, at least for me,
Mhm.
which is to say that it it feels like the Souls games and everything else almost get held to like different standards, if
Mhm.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, and that isn't meant as a dig at From Software's work at all, um, but more to say that there's sort of this like tolerance when many people in the review industry go to write up, a review for one of From games, um, for being forced to like figure stuff out, right, and having like the
Mhm.
answer not immediately clear or intuitive to them, um, or having to struggle through and learn the mechanics or something. for a
Right.
particularly hard boss or something. Um, uh, and maybe sort of because of I guess the legacy behind From games, right? People, you know, are just inherently more resistant to criticizing that,
Sure.
which I think is probably a good thing, because I think a significant portion of the time when difficulty gets criticized in the game, it's because the reviewer didn't take the time to learn mechanics, or
Hmm.
um, uh, understand things properly.
Yeah.
Um, but when that same sort of ambiguity occurs in other games, or that same sort of difficulty,
Hmm.
people, especially within the you know general critic body, um,
Hmm.
just immediately slam it. And
Well, do you have examples? Like, I'm
yeah.
not trying to. Okay, okay, yeah,
Sure.
because I'm kind of curious.
So there's a couple big ones that stand out for me this year, which I've already brought up in my snubs category.
Oh,
Um, but Ixion and Solstice both got reviewed
oh,
significantly worse, at least from an overall open critic average, than uh, how I ended up reviewing them. And
I thought
difficulty
it.
was
Oh, well, I'm sorry. I just want. I thought Ixine got like a high 70 something. Did it get low? I thought it did okay. Maybe I'm totally off. Maybe I missed them.
um, so yes, that's fair. Ixion was 78.
Okay, but
And
like 100% on. I'm with you on Solstice. Like you were, that was definitely like an interesting dynamic where you were you're way higher than the average critic, and I think you put up, you definitely made some really persuasive arguments. So
yeah, um, and I will say, at least towards Ixion, I don't want to like necessarily make this a case of, an 8 on our site is worth more than an 8 somewhere else or something like that. But I
hmm.
do think the way that we handle the scoring methodology means that, an 8 out of 10 is at least intended by the methodology to be a genuinely great game,
Hmm.
whereas like a 78 is, at least for
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
a larger critic average, generally indicates a more average score.
Hmm.
But regardless of scoring, difficulty
Sure. Sure.
was
Sure.
was one of
Sure. I
the
get you.
biggest complaints that came out about
It was a
both those
right. It was
games.
like a write up. Like that was the you saw that like written down. There were a few like critiques against that and stuff like that. That was the
Yeah,
focus. I get you. I get you.
and particularly people being upset about things not being like tutorialized or made obvious to
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's my hope would be, I think, with From being popular, that not only will more developers um, branch out to, having these sort of less intrusive UIs, moving
Hmm.
towards design where players figure things out as well, but that
Hmm.
critics would be more accepting of that too in
Yeah.
other genres as well.
Oh yeah. 100%. I could like I'm always going back to Far Cry Blood Dragon, like to look around, and that kind of bullshit is like, I mean, I guess, I mean, we've, I don't know about you, but I've seen the examples of, critics as like, what the hell's going on? I mean, seems like you should be able to follow along how to do this or that, and they just don't. So I'm 100% with you there. Like, in a way, I think the more interesting challenge, um, like when I think of From Software and how you're talking about that, is the when it comes to tutorializing and stuff like that, they do a good job of like subtly. It's that idea of like subtly incorporating it in a special way so that it like sticks in your mind too. That'll be the interesting thing versus just, here's a menu, here's what you do, and it's just super bland.
Yeah, I don't want to like write that off as what From does. It just doesn't explain anything. Although I would argue there are some cases where it does kind of brush up against that.
Sure.
But yeah, no, more to say that it's something that I hope gets embraced by all sides of the industry.
For sure. Oh, well, I need a cigarette. Was that good for you, or was
Yeah.
No.
Well, we are at the end of our Game of the Year awards. Congratulations to Elden Ring and all of the winners / shortlist games. Bit of a long discussion, but I think worth it to revisit 2022 one last time before moving on to 2023 in earnest. Although to be honest, I'm kind of already halfway into 2023 with a few indie games that are coming out later this month. Just wrapped up Eston Cell, Dead Space Remake, and Fire Emblem Engage, halfway through both of those.
Nice.
So yeah, 2023 started out with a bang.
So,
alrighty, well,
how's that do for you, Paul?
A long road, but I think that's we're coming to the end of it.
We came out more enlightened by the end. That's all that matters.
We all learned something along the way.
Exactly.
All right. Well,
anyways,
thanks
guys,
for everyone for tuning in.
Yes, thank you, wonderful souls, for staying with us. Hugs and kisses to all of you, and until next time,